Today I'm sharing 50 Dollar Tree DIYs, and these are some of my absolute favorites, all in one video, just for you. So let's jump right in. For the first DIY, I'll be making a little tabletop stand, and I'll be using this wood shape. It looks like a little house with a triangle top, and I'll be using two for this project. Since I'll be painting these, I'm just sanding off that sticky residue from the label just to make sure the paint goes on nice and smooth. And I'm just using a couple warm neutral acrylic paints and thinning them down a bit with some water. So I'm just brushing that paint on and then wiping it down. And since it's thinned out, you can still see some of that wood grain underneath, which gives it a really nice stained effect. I'm using Territorial Beige and Khaki from Apple Barrel, and mixing those two together with a bit of water always gives me that perfect warm neutral shade, very neutral and earthy. I'm keeping it simple here, but you can totally paint or stain these whatever color you like. But let me know below, do you prefer stained wood or painted wood? I guess I like both. Once the paint is fully dry, you can use a heat tool or even a hairdryer to speed that up. I'll be adding some stenciling to add some character, and I'm using this beautiful bird and branch stencil from Walmart. I'll be gluing one of the wood shape on top of the other to form a little L shape, like a mini stand with a back, and I'll be stenciling the large bird and branch design onto the vertical piece that'll stand upright. So once I have that where I want it, I just tape it down, and I wanted the design to kind of trail out from the edge for a more natural, flowy look. I wanted a dark, almost black color for the stencil, so I'm using graphite from Craftsmart, and it gives a nice bold contrast without being too harsh. So I'm just pouncing the paint over the stencil, and I always make sure to dab off any excess paint first, and that just helps avoid bleeding and keeps the design nice and crisp. And that came out beautifully. For the horizontal piece on the bottom, I thought it would look really nice to have some of the branch coming up from below, like they're growing from the base. So I used a different part of the stencil to add that detail, just to give it a bit more balance. I could have totally left it just like that, and honestly, I think it already looks really pretty, but I felt like the top could use just a little more, so I added a few extra branches above the bird just to fill it out a bit more. You can definitely leave it as is if you like, it looks great either way. To put it together, I just added a strip of glue along the straight edge of the piece that's lying flat, and then I placed the other one right on top, standing up. Super simple. You can place some little candle holders right on top, or some small succulents. You could also use it as a decorative bookend. Definitely lots of cute ways to style it. For this project, I'm using one of these round glass plate candle holders from Dollar Tree. It has such a beautiful texture. I'm making a little wooden base for it just to add some warmth, so I grabbed a couple of these wood planks from Dollar Tree. I want the planks to form a cross shape underneath, and I want it to fit perfectly. So I go ahead and measure, mark, and trim the pieces down to the following size, and I just use a miter box and saw to cut it. Now all I have to do is glue them together, and so I'm just marking the center of the longer wood, and that's where I'm going to glue the two smaller pieces, one on each side. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick glue. I love this glue, it's really thick and it also dries pretty fast. Now I decided to add a little extra detail by gluing some wood pieces onto the ends of the base. These pieces are actually from those mini pallets from Dollar Tree that I had already pulled apart. These were two slats, and I just trimmed each one in half to make 4 smaller pieces. Then I just glued the pieces vertically onto the ends of the wood base. It didn't take much effort at all, but that little touch of wood on the ends really took it up a notch. It just makes the whole thing look so much more finished and put together. So at first I thought I was going to stain it, and that was the plan, but once I had it all put together, I really loved how the natural wood looked. I'm just going to spray it with a sealer and leave it natural, but let me know in the comments below, would you leave it natural or paint it a different color? So I just dropped a glass candle dish right on top, and this one is all done. For this project, I'll be using this 14-inch grapevine wreath. I get these at Michael's and they're quite inexpensive. I think this was just under $5. I'm going to fill it with some Dollar Tree flowers, keeping it pretty simple. I'm going with these white and purple shades, along with a few dainty flowers I pulled from a Dollar Tree bouquet. And I'm just going with these smaller ones to keep it light, natural, and airy. I love how delicate these flowers look. I want this bunch here to look more full, and I'll be using 4 of these on the wreath. I love the tiny white flowers, and I'm going to be attaching some colorful ones to the bunch. So to do that, I'm just pulling out some of the white flowers on top, and they just pop right out. And then I'm sliding in some of the colorful ones, like these pretty yellows and pinks, and I'm just pushing that down, and then I just place that white one back on top. I'm adding these gorgeous lavender stems from Dollar Tree and attaching them to the bunch. I do use quite a bit of these on each stem. Sometimes I'll even add 3 on a single stem. Now you can keep it as full or simple as you like, but either way, it gives off that natural wildflower vibe. You can even just pop them in a vase or in a white ceramic pitcher for a simple, beautiful arrangement. It's so pretty. Dollar Tree also has these beautiful rustic looking white leaf trays that I got recently, and it would also look so pretty placed on top with some candles. Okay, so back to the wreath. To attach, I'm first bending the bottom stem to match the natural curve of the wreath. And then I'm just tucking the flowers inside the grapevine, gently working them into place. Now you can always add extra reinforcements like hot glue or floral wire to make sure everything stays secure. But I'm just mostly letting the flowers naturally tuck into the wreath and just securing a few areas here and there. I only made 4 bunches for this wreath, so I spread them out as best as I could, but you can definitely add a few more for a fuller look. Now I'll be filling in any gaps and empty spaces to balance everything out. I'll also be adding a wooden sign right across, so I did make space for that, so 4 bunches was just enough for this one. For the wooden sign, I'll be using this wood plank from Dollar Tree. This one's 18 inches and I'll be trimming it to about 14 inches or so. For the wording, I have a couple options, both from Dollar Tree. There's this wooden home sign, and I love these. They come in a 2-pack. They're quite thick, and I do use them a lot. The other option was this welcome metal sign. I like the font and the length, so I decided to go with that one. I'll be painting the word white and staining the wood with antique wax. So I'm applying the antique wax with a damp cloth to keep it from going on too thick or too dark. Since the wreath is already a deep color, I want the wood to be a few shades lighter to create some contrast while adding some warmth. Before I paint the metal, I noticed that there were a couple of holes that I wanted to cover up, so I decided to just glue a couple of these metal thumbtacks, and these are also from Dollar Tree. Now I decided to snip off that nail part, but you don't have to. You can also just hammer that straight onto the wood as well. So I just glue them right over the holes and they blend in really nicely. You can leave it like this, but I'm going to paint this white. Now I was going to use acrylic paint, but I changed my mind and decided to take it outside and spray paint it instead. I thought I was completely out of the white spray paint, but thank goodness there was still a little left in the can. Next, I'm gluing it onto the wood, and I'm using Titebond multi-surface glue for a stronghold, along with a few dabs of hot glue to keep it all in place while it sets. And the final step is to attach everything in place. Once that's done, I go in and fill in any gaps or empty spaces that needs a little more fullness. I'm adding these purple flowers from Dollar Tree along with some leftover lavender to bring in more of that soft wildflower look. I love how this turned out. It has such a rustic, organic look, almost like it was gathered straight from a garden. And with that, this DIY is all finished. For this DIY, I was inspired by Pottery Barn's large beaded garlands. I've always loved how they make such a statement in a room, especially their terracotta garland. So I thought it'd be fun to make my own version with a little coastal vibe. So I headed to Dollar Tree to pick up some of their plastic tennis balls, but unfortunately they only had 1 left, and I was so bummed because I definitely needed at least 3 packs. But then I stumbled across their foam crafting balls, and I thought they just might work for what I had in mind, so I decided to give them a try. By the way, if you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps out. Alright, so for the color, I'm using this nautical blue paint from Anita's. I added a little bit of white just to lighten it up a bit. I don't believe they sell this brand anymore, but any shade of blue will work. And to give the paint some nice texture, I'm adding in some baking soda. The more baking soda you add, the thicker and more textured it gets, so it kind of depends on the look that you want. I just mix it until it feels nice and thick, but still easy to brush on. Before I start painting, I went ahead and slid them through some wooden skewers. And then I just start brushing on the paint mixture. It actually went on really nicely. Now because the foam has a bunch of little pits and uneven spots, I wanted to smooth some of that out a bit, so for the second coat, I grabbed some of this lightweight spackle from Dollar Tree. I just mixed a little bit of that spackle right into my paint mixture, and that really helped fill in those little gaps and gave the beads even more dimension. And you know, it really gave that terracotta clay vibe I was going for, which I love. After that, I used my heat tool to speed up the drying time, and once they were dry, I thought I'd rub on a little more of that spackle right on top of the foam, just to smooth things out a little bit more, while still keeping some of that nice texture. And it actually gave a really nice finish. I mean, you can totally seal them and leave it like this if you want, but I decided to take it a step further. I went back over everything with another layer of the blue paint, just to even it all out and pull the whole look together. And finally, to add a little softness, I took a damp paper towel, dabbed it in some white paint, and lightly tapped it all over the beads. And it gave them this really soft, weathered look, and the damp paper towel just helped to blend that white so it's not too harsh. Now I'm ready to string them, and I'll be using this thick jute string from Dollar Tree. I also thought it'd be cute to add a little contrast by mixing in some wooden beads between the blue ones. Then I started alternating one blue bead and one wood bead, and I just kept doing that. But then at this point, I started having second thoughts with the wood. They look really pretty mixed in, but it wasn't exactly what I originally pictured in my head. I really wanted to see this idea through just how I imagined it, so I ended up taking it all apart and starting over, and this time using only the blue. So as I'm placing the beads, I also tied a little knot between each of them as I went. Super simple, but it totally gives it that finished, slightly rustic look that I love. Once I got to the end, I tied one last knot to hold everything in place. Then I made a little loop with the end of the string, kind of like a small handle, and added a tiny dot of hot glue right at the base to secure it. After that, I took a small piece of that same jute string and I wrapped it around the base of the loop to give it a nice clean finish and cover up where everything comes together. I spray sealed it, and that's it. I am so happy with how this one turned out. I love the texture, the color, and how it gives a Pottery Barn vibe for way less. Dollar Tree has a variety of natural wood slices in different shapes, and I love crafting with these. So for today's video, I did pick up a variation of them. I'll be using the circle one for this project. I'm going to be turning it into an adorable rustic coaster, so first I'm going to paint it with these neutral warm colors from Apple Barrel, Territorial Beige and Khaki, but any color will work. I'm going to mix the two together and then add a little bit of water to thin it out. I really don't want it to go on too thick, but more like a stain. To apply the color, I'm just going to use a piece of cloth and I just dip that in the paint and apply that on one side. If the surface feels a little too raw or rough, just give it a light sanding before painting and that paint will go on nicely. So after I apply the paint color, I also wipe it down immediately so that you can see some of that wood grain underneath. I want to add some stenciling on top, and I'm going to use my Cricut to cut out the stencil on this Dollar Tree vinyl with a sticky back. I'll be cutting out some trees, and I just downloaded the image from Canva and I uploaded it to Cricut Design Space. I thought the trees were perfect. It really adds to that overall rustic look. Of course, if you don't have a Cricut, there are other options. Like at Dollar Tree, they have a nice variety of beautiful stencils or rub-on transfers that would really work nicely. Now, before I apply the stencil, I remove that jute hanger, and pulling out the staples, it was not easy, so I did have to use a heavy-duty staple remover. So I placed that vinyl right in the center. Now I should have centered the trees a bit, leaving a vinyl cushion all around, but instead I cut it too close to the edge. So I just added some tape on the side to protect the wood. I'll be painting the trees black, and I'm using Faux Art's black chalk paint. Now before stenciling, always make sure to blot out any excess paint that's on the brush to prevent smudging. But you know, using a vinyl with a sticky back, it definitely helped in preventing that paint from seeping underneath. So I just pounce over the stencil, and once it's fully covered, I carefully remove the stencil. Because of that somewhat fine details on the stencil, I did have to slowly peel it out, little by little on all sides, but it did come out nicely. And any areas that stuck, I just weeded it out. Now I'll be using this as a coaster, but honestly you don't have to. I think this is also really pretty just the way it is. But to turn this into a coaster, you're going to have to seal it to protect the surface from moisture and heat. I'll be using Minwax polyacrylic to seal, and I'm going to be applying several layers just to make sure I have a good seal. But if you want to use something even more durable, especially if you're making these as gifts, a polyurethane finish is a good choice. Now to protect the surface the coaster will be resting on, I'm going to apply some adhesive cork. This one's from Dollar Tree, and I'm just cutting the amount that I need, making sure it doesn't extend beyond the edges of the wood. And then I just stick that on the bottom. Now I really loved how this turned out, so I wanted to make another one. This time I did a little bird on a branch. I also centered the stencil before cutting so that I had some cushion all around. I'm leaving the wood as is, natural. So I just apply the black paint over the stencil, dabbing out the excess paint and applying it in thin layers. This one turned out so beautiful. Once it dries completely, I seal it and then I cut and stick that cork adhesive on the bottom. And this DIY is done. You can really be creative with these. Personalize them to your style, make a whole set with different designs for your home or as a gift. It really turned out beautifully. So I headed to Dollar Tree and grabbed a handful of their bamboo cutting boards. You'll usually find these in the kitchen supply aisle, and I really love the quality of these. I'll be making a riser for this project, and I'll be using a cutting board, and I'm going to paint it using this chalk paint from Waverly in the shade Sandstone. I really wanted to paint it a nice neutral color, so I thought this was perfect. So I'm applying the paint with a brush, and this color really does go on nicely. I do about a couple coats, but really one was probably more than enough because I do end up distressing it a bit. I also turn it over and paint the other side, which will be the bottom. It's completely optional, but I wanted to give it a nice finished look. So once that's completely dried, I take a sanding sheet and I give it a light sanding. Definitely along the edges and on random areas on the top surface. I also switched to a coarser grit sandpaper to make it look a little more scratchy. And I just continue sanding until I like the way it looks. Now I wanted to stencil in a floral pattern on top of the wood, so I just decided to cut a stencil out with my Cricut. And what I did was go on Canva and downloaded a pattern that I liked, and then I uploaded it to Cricut Design Space, and that's usually how I like to customize my stencils. But you know, there are so many other options. Dollar Tree does have a handful of stencils or rub-on transfers or even decorative decals that you can use instead. So once my stencil is ready to go, I just use some Dollar Tree transfer tape to place the stencil vinyl on the wood. I place that on one end all the way to the edge. And I'll be using white acrylic paint from Apple Barrel over the stencil. So after I dip my brush on the paint, I dab out the excess before pouncing it over the stencil. It's always best to apply it in light layers to prevent any smudging. Of course, the sticky vinyl also helps. Now, I don't want the stencil to go on too bold or opaque. I want it to look a little faded, so I do apply it lightly in some areas and a little darker in others. And then I carefully peel it out and I move it over to the other side. So I do the same thing, adding paint to my brush, dabbing out the excess, and then pouncing it over the stencil. It's such a beautiful floral pattern. For the legs, I'll be using these wood peg dolls. These are from Hobby Lobby. They came in a pack of 8 and they were quite inexpensive for the pack. To contrast the top, I'm just going to stain it with this gel stain, and I'm just wiping it or brushing it on and then wiping it down. And then I turn it over and glue the legs on the corners. I really like how the wood stain looks against the sandstone floral top. I let it dry completely and then I seal it. I'll be using some clear wax from Waverly. So I apply that with a wax paintbrush all over the top surface as well as the legs. Now I always like to let things that I stencil dry overnight before I apply the wax just to make sure nothing gets smudged. And once the wax has completely dry, I do buff it down just a bit. With wax, the more that you buff, the more sheen you'll get. And this beautiful riser is done. So Dollar Tree has these really adorable 6-inch round woven baskets. I think they're so beautiful on their own, and we're going to give them all a quick little upgrade to make them even more charming. So this first one is going to be really quick to do. Just grab a couple of these baskets. I'll be using this one with a black detail on top, and I'll be turning these into candle holders. And I'm going to be placing a couple of these battery operated pillar candles inside. So quick and simple, and it just adds a really nice, cozy, warm touch to any space. Now, if you want to add a fresh, natural touch to the candle holders and give it a brighter look, you can add some flowers or greenery. I'll be using the baby's breath on this bouquet. This one's from Walmart, and I really like the realistic look of these. And I just plucked the baby's breath from the bouquet, as you can see here. So I'm just going to fill in the basket, placing the baby's breath around the base of the candle. So I'm just filling in that area. Now, if you want it to look more full, you can use a couple of these bouquets or keep it light, but I really love the fresh, simple look of the baby's breath. Now, if you want to make it even more full, you can add some greenery here and there to create more depth. Mixing in different types of greenery adds a variety of textures, making the arrangement look more natural and vibrant. And finally, for some color, you can add in some flowers, and I just tucked those inside the baby's breath and greenery. I pulled all these flowers from different Dollar Tree flower bouquets, and I'm just playing around with them, mixing and matching different colors. I think they all look so pretty together, and the flowers really give it a fresh, lively feel that brightens up the whole piece. For this project, I'll be making a tier tray, and so I headed to the dinnerware aisle at Dollar Tree, and I'll be using these beautiful turquoise swirl stoneware. I picked up a dinner plate, a side plate, and a bowl for this DIY project. For glue, you'll want to use a strong glue like E6000 for a permanent hold, but for something temporary, you can also use hot glue, which will give just enough stability for a short-term display, and you can easily take it apart later. Now, before we dive into the project, I first wanted to share some options and ideas with what you can do with these dishes. So first, you can turn the bowl over and place a side dish on top, and this makes a little nice tray for jewelry or a little planter or for a dessert table. You can also turn the bowl upward, which gives it a different look. You can do the same thing with a larger plate. I think this is such a pretty little tray that can be used again in so many ways. You can also incorporate some candlesticks, which gives it an elegant and stylish look. Dollar Tree has some really nice ones, and so I'll be using some of their glass taper candle holders. And you can leave them as is, but I'm going to paint these, and I'm using linen from Faux. So first I'm just wiping it down with some rubbing alcohol to remove any grease. Now you can also spray paint these or prime them with a spray paint primer, or you can add some baking soda to the mixture, and that helps the paint to adhere better and it keeps it in place. I'm using a round sponge brush, and that really helps to minimize streaks and it covers it faster. And then I just seal it. I like to use Krylon spray sealer. And so other options, you can attach the side plate on top of the candle holder, and that gives it a nice elegant appearance. Attach the candle holder on top of the side plate, and then attach the bowl right on top. And this is such a chic and stylish jewelry stand. Now continuing on with the project, I will be making a 3-tier tray, and so again for a permanent hold, use a strong glue like E6000, but you can also use a combination of both. And so to glue, I flip the side plate over and then I add some glue on the rim of the candlestick and attach that in the center of the smaller plate. And you really can position a candlestick whichever way you like. And then I add some glue on the other end of the candlestick and I place that right in the center of the plate. Okay, continuing on to my 3-tier tray, I attach another candlestick right on top in the center of the smaller plate. I apply some glue on the candlestick and place the bowl right on top of that. Now your stylish 3-tier tray is ready to be used. Use it for jewelry or for decorating or for displaying succulents or greenery. It's stylish and functional. Okay, for this project, I'll be making a lantern and I'll be using 36 blocks. I'll be staining with acrylic paint, apple barrels, territorial beige, and khaki, thinned out with a little bit of water. So I brush that on and then immediately wipe it down with a clean cloth before it dries to remove the excess paint. Now I do apply the paint all over the surface and the sides, except for the ends because that's where I'll be applying glue. So first I'm going to be forming a square with 4 of the blocks. So I just apply a little wood glue on the ends and I form a square. This carpenter square from Dollar Tree really helps. I always love using this, especially when I'm working with these blocks. Now I make 2 sets of the square, and then I'm going to take 4 more blocks and glue them right on the unpainted ends, and I add that on both of the squares. So these 2 are going to make the top and the base of the lantern. Next, I'm gluing 5 blocks together end to end. Now I know I'm kind of speeding through this, but after I glue them together, I do hold them together for a few minutes to give the wood time to bond. But with that said, this glue does dry really fast compared to some of my other favorite wood glues, and I love the little nozzle on this one, especially when you're working with these little blocks. To assemble, I'm going to be gluing the blocks of 5 vertically on those unpainted ends. So I put some glue on an end and then I take the glue blocks and holding it vertically, I attach the end of that one on the end with glue. So it makes a 90-degree angle, and then I take a little square dowel and I use that to push the 2 together. It also helps make sure that it's standing at a 90-degree angle, otherwise you're going to have a crooked looking lantern. And I do the same thing on all 4 sides. By the way, if you guys are enjoying these budget Dollar Tree DIYs, don't forget to give a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so that you don't miss out on any future thrifty creations. Okay, I give the blocks a little time to bond and then I flip it over, and then on that square piece, which is going to be the base, I apply some glue on those unstained ends. And then I very carefully match up the 2 pieces together so that now I have a top and a bottom. You can place some candles inside or a little faux plant. That Dollar Tree glass plate candle holder also fits nicely inside. It's so simple and stunning. For this DIY, I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards, and I'm going to be adding some stenciling on top, and I'll be using one that I got at Walmart. They have some really nice, inexpensive stencil options. I'll be using this one with a decorative circle. So I place the stencil towards the top, centering it, and I'm just securing it in place with some masking tape. I'm also covering up any areas close to the circle. For paint, I'm using apple barrels white, but you can definitely use any color you prefer. I definitely considered black or even a neutral color. So I'm just pouncing over the stencil with a stencil brush, and I just go over it a couple times, and after that I carefully remove the stencil. I wanted to add some wording in the center, and since this is going to be a little cookbook, tablet, or phone stand for the kitchen, I thought I would stencil in the word recipe in the center. And I just cut a stencil out on my Cricut using a Dollar Tree vinyl. But you can definitely customize it and put any word or phrase that will fit. So here's how it's looking so far. I like it. It's very clean and simple. I'll be using this 1x2 inch wood from Dollar Tree from a previous project, as well as a paint stir stick. I'll be trimming both to the width of the board, so about 6 inches. To match the stenciling, I'll be painting the wood white, but before I do that, to make it easier, I glue the 1x2 and the paint stick together. I just apply some glue on one narrow side of the 1x2, and I attach the paint stick to it like so. And I clamp it a bit to give the paint some time to dry. Next, I'll be attaching a Dollar Tree easel on the back of the board. So I apply some Titebond multi-purpose glue on the easel, and then I attach that to the back of the board, making sure they're both flush on the bottom. Next, I stand it up, and then I pull the easel stand back, which will reposition the easel,
It lifts it up just a bit so that the board rests or leans nicely on it, and you can clamp it to make sure it bonds nicely. Then I go ahead and paint the glued wood pieces white, and I make sure to leave the narrow side unpainted. Then I apply some glue on that unpainted side, and I attach that towards the bottom of the board. And finally, to seal it, you can definitely use your preferred sealer. For this one, I'm using a spray sealer from Krylon. It definitely makes an adorable, customizable gift. And I think this turned out so beautiful and simple.
Dollar Tree actually had some really nice printed canvases, and I picked this one up. I thought it was just so soft and calming. It has these pale greenish blues, soft grays, and creamy tones. It kind of reminds me of a peaceful little sunrise over the water. I also grabbed this velvet frame from Dollar Tree, and it's so pretty and soft, and I thought it would go really well with a canvas print. So I'm going to separate the canvas from the frame. It's stapled on there pretty good, so I'm using my little staple remover to carefully take out all the staples. Once I got the canvas free, I mark off the part of the print that I like best. I just wanted to make sure I got all those pretty colors in there, and then I went ahead and I carefully cut it out. I thought I'd just leave out that glass when placing the print in the frame. I like the look of the canvas, so I didn't want to cover it up. And we're all done with this one. I just love how the frame and print looks together. It's so simple and serene. Dollar Tree sells these really nice wooden slices in different sizes and shapes, and for this project, I'll be using a couple of their rectangular one. Now, I did make sure that they were similar in size because we'll be making a cute little planter box with them. I'll also be using a couple of these square mini wooden pallets, also from Dollar Tree. First, I need to remove the jute hanger and the staples. The staples are pretty secure, so I'm using my pliers to pull out the string and a staple remover to pull the staples out. It's really attached in there, so if you don't want to deal with it, you can always just leave the staples in place. I'm going to apply some antique wax over the wooden slices to give them a nice warm look. I'm using a damp cloth to apply the wax. I want the wax to go on very lightly, so using a damp cloth helps to spread it out without making it too dark or overpowering. Now you can leave it as is for a natural rustic finish, or if you prefer, you can also paint it for a completely different look. Now for the mini wooden square palettes, I'm going to use this beautiful celery green chalk paint from Waverly. It's a soft, fresh color that adds a pop of brightness without being too overpowering. I love how chalk paint gives a smooth, matte finish, and it looks really pretty on these little wooden pieces. Now there are some hard to reach areas inside the palettes, and so I had to use a smaller brush to really get into those spots. Once everything is dried, I'm going to glue them together. So I'm just applying some wood glue on the sides of the palettes, and I'm applying it on both of them. And then I stand up one of the slices and attach the palettes on the edges. And then I attach the remaining wooden slice to form a rectangle. To make the base, I'll be using a couple small square dowels and 3 giant craft sticks. So to match, I'm applying some of that antique wax on the craft sticks. And then I'm painting the square dowels with that same celery chalk paint. Okay, once that's dry, I'm applying some wood glue on the inside bottom of the square palettes, and then I'm just attaching the dowel to that, and I'm making sure that the bottom is flush. Then I just do the same thing on the opposite side, applying glue on the palette where the dowel is going to be attached. So these dowels are what's going to hold up the craft stick base. After that, I just apply some glue on the dowels or the ends of the craft sticks, and I place that down to create the base. And I'm using 3 craft sticks, spreading them out equally. Now I was going to end here. It's so perfect just like that, but then I thought it would look really beautiful with some decorative stenciling, at least on one side. It was such a nice blank canvas. And so I got this stencil 3-pack from Walmart. This was just under $3. The stencils are beautiful and the birds on the branches are so charming. I wanted to add one of those designs. I'll be using black chalk paint, but you can also add some different colors there. Maybe black and white for the feathers on the bird, a dark brown on the branches, and some green on the leaves. So that's another option. So I'm applying the black chalk paint over the stencil, making sure to dab out as much excess paint as I can. I'm gently tapping it over the stencil, working it in light layers to get a smooth, even coverage. This way I avoid any smudging and keep the design edges nice and crisp. Once I'm done with that, I carefully remove the stencil before it dries completely, and this one is all done. It's such a simple yet beautiful project, and I love how it turned out. You can add some flowers, succulents, or candles, or even use it as a little organizer for your favorite things. For this next DIY, I'm using this wood frame from Michaels. I'll be using this beautiful floral peel and stick wallpaper for the background. It has these soft neutral flowers and greenery, and it has a mix of muted soft tones, and it pairs really nicely with wood. I'll be trimming down the paper to fit, and so I'm just creasing the paper, pressing down along the inner edge of the frame, just to have a little guide, and then I just cut it out. Before I add the paper though, I decided to stain the frame using the special walnut water-based stain. You could totally paint it instead, or even water down some acrylic paint to make your own stain. So I just taped off the edge of the surface next to the wood just to keep the stain from going there. And then I brushed the stain on and wiped it down with a cloth to let that pretty wood grain show through. I stained the entire outer frame, including the sides and the inner edges. I also grabbed 4 paint stir sticks from my local hardware store, and I trimmed them to size to fit across the frame. And I just used my little miter box and saw to trim them down. Then I stained them in the same special walnut color so it all matched. Now I was having second thoughts about this color on the paint stick. I thought it might have been too dark and matchy, but I decided to just go with it, and hopefully it turns out just how I'm imagining it. Once the stain was dry, it was time to put everything together. So I peeled back a corner of the wallpaper and I pressed it down in place in the corner, working from one edge to the other. I'm just smoothing it down as I remove that backing paper to remove any air bubbles. Before I started gluing down the paint sticks, I wanted to see how they looked first, and honestly, it just felt a little bit too much of that dark wood. I really wanted the whole frame to feel a little softer, so I decided to tone it down with a layer of simply white, semi-transparent water-based stain from Minwax. I just applied it with a cloth and I wiped it back. It gave kind of like a soft whitewash effect. You could also use watered down acrylic paint for a similar effect as well, or even just paint it solid white. In the center of the frame, I'll be adding this home wood sign from Dollar Tree. I painted it in the color graphite from Craftsmart, and it's a deep dark gray, and I think it gives it a bit of a softer look as opposed to painting it just black. I love these stick woodwords from Dollar Tree, and they come in a pack of 2, which is nice. Now once everything was dry, I decided to just go with 3 paint sticks instead of 4, and glue that right in the center for the word to rest on. That way they were not covering too much of that pretty paper underneath, and I really love how the paint sticks turned out. They do blend really nice with the background. And finally, I glued the home sign right on top of the paint sticks. And this DIY is done. Now, I knew I wanted my next video to be on Dollar Tree stickers, so I headed to their sticker aisle, and their metallic stickers immediately caught my attention. Seriously, the detail on these, stunning. I've never used these before, and the ideas just kept popping in my mind. So for this DIY, I'll be using this little tray from Dollar Tree and this metallic sticker pack from Dollar Tree. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick out one of the stickers to place on the long side of the tray. So once I pick one, I carefully peel that off and I place that right in the center. And I make sure to press that down well, especially along the edges. And look how nice that looks already. I'm going to paint this tray, and I'll be using this durable Deco Art paint and sealer in the shade Seaside Blue. So I apply the paint with a brush, and I'll be completely covering the wooden tray with the paint. So I brush that on all over, including the bottom.
On the side with the metallic sticker, I just paint right over that several times until it's completely coated. But the trick with these is to make sure it's completely painted over, but not so thick that you fill in and cover up the beautiful details. And so I just use a small brush to delicately remove any excess paint, as well as to get to those hard to reach areas. To get the best coverage, you will want to layer in the paint, allowing it to dry in between before adding another layer. And a heat tool helps to speed up the process. Okay, once that's completely painted and it's dried, I'm going to sand along the sides of the tray. I'm only lightly sanding the edges and corners, avoiding the sticker. Next, I'm going to be applying some antique wax. This one is from Waverly, and I'm going to apply that with a damp cloth. You'll also need a dry cloth on hand. I did add a few drops of water to the wax as well to lightly thin it down. So I just apply the wax all over, especially in the areas where I sanded, buffing it in with a damp cloth, which helps to blend it in nicely, and then wiping it down with a dry one. And then I also apply the antique wax over the metallic detail as well as around it. I also use a small brush to apply it on top, making sure it gets into all those areas I want to be a little darker, and then I wipe it down with a dry cloth. And I just keep going back and forth with a small detail brush and then wiping it down until I like the way it looks. And if there are any areas on the tray that look a little too heavy with the wax, I just blend it out and tone it down with a damp cloth. I want to elevate the tray, and I'll be using these Dollar Tree wood pieces. These were little snowmen and they came in a pack. I'll also be rubbing on some of that antique wax just so that it blends nicely with the tray. I'm going to leave the color as is because I do love the contrast, but I do avoid applying the wax where I will be applying glue. Now initially I wasn't planning on adding legs, otherwise I would have left the bottom unpainted or at least taped off the area where I applied glue before painting, but with that said, it still held quite well. Now I do carefully flip it over after a few minutes, and I place some objects on top so that it bonds well. And there you have it. What a stunning transformation. For this project, I'll be making a beautiful wall hook, and I'll be using 2 of Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards and this decorative metallic wall hook from Dollar Tree. These come with 2 black screws, which you will find in the back. It's very pretty, shabby chic, and lightly distressed. I'm going to glue the 2 boards together so that it's one thick piece. So I apply some Titebond Quick and Thick multi-surface glue on one of the boards, and then I place the other board on top. I make sure the sides are flush, and then I clamp it and let it dry completely before the next step. And I just left that alone overnight. Once it's completely dry, you'll have a really nice solid piece of bamboo wood, and this feels really nice and sturdy. Next, I'm going to place the metallic hook right on top, and I position it where I want it to be placed. There's 2 holes where the screws go in, and so I mark it, and then before I add the screws, I drill in some pilot holes. I just wrapped a piece of tape on the bit so I know how far to drill. The bamboo is quite dense, so this will help make it easier to get those screws in. Since the hook is white, I wanted the screws to blend, so I just dab on a little bit of white paint over the screws to blend it. I'll be placing a couple triangle hangers on the back. While you can just use one and position it in the top center, I'm going to be placing 2 on this one. To make sure the triangle hangers are placed evenly, I'll be using this carpenter square to mark precisely. So I turn the hook over with the top part down, and I line the corner with a ruler, and I mark the inner right angle corner. And I mark it on both sides where I'm going to screw in the nails. And this beautiful, modern, and vintage wooden metallic wall hook is done. Whether you use it to hang things on or as a decorative accent for your home, this simple project really turned out beautiful. For the next DIY, I'll be using this 12-inch 1x2 from Dollar Tree and this little woven basket from Dollar Tree as well. I'll be making a simple cross base, so first step is to measure the length that I want. So I'll be trimming this to about 4 3/4 inch and 2 to just about 1 3/4 of an inch. Before staining, I'm going to glue the wood together using Titebond Quick and Thick multi-purpose glue. I've marked the center of the 4 3/4 inch piece, and I'm applying glue to the ends of the smaller pieces, and I adhere that right in the center of the larger one, like so. I want to add a bit of color like a light stain, khaki, and territorial beige from Apple Barrel, then down with some water, and I brush that right onto the wood.
I love how these two colors blend to create a really nice neutral earthy tan shade, but you can definitely paint the base any color you like. I'm brushing on the paint mixture and then wiping off the excess immediately before it dries. Since it's acrylic paint, it dries pretty quickly. I also lightly sanded the ends so they don't soak up too much of the stain. These raw ends always seem to soak up the most color. And once that dries, you are all done. I really love how adding a simple wooden base elevates the look. It's a great example of how small changes can make a big difference. And that's the approach I've been taking with this channel, adding simple new skills to spark fresh ideas and creativity. I grabbed this decorative chalkboard gold frame from Dollar Tree. It's honestly so pretty. I love the ornate, vintage inspired look, and the intricate detailing really makes it look way more expensive, even though it's just plastic. I'll also be using one of Dollar Tree's classic glass taper candle holders for this project. I'm turning these two simple items into a charming frame pedestal by propping the frame right on top of the candle holder. I'm going to paint the frame using this chalk paint from Craftsmart in the shade khaki. It's a beautiful soft natural beige tone with hints of taupe. Before painting, I'm popping out the black chalkboard along with the backing board, and I'll put those back in later. Feel free to pick whatever paint color matches your style and decor. Any color you'll love would totally work. I'm using this round sponge brush to paint the frame, and initially I planned to paint the whole thing solid, but as I brushed over it lightly, the paint only caught the raised parts of the design, and it actually ended up looking really pretty. It created this really nice contrast with the gold and made all the details stand out even more. So I just decided to go with that. I did leave the inner and outer sides unpainted, and I just like the way that looked. I'm painting the candle holder that same shade. Now, just a few tips on painting glass. You want to make sure it's completely clean first. I did give it a quick wash and wiped it down with some rubbing alcohol to make sure there wasn't any residue. You can also give it a light sanding with a fine grit sanding sheet to help the paint grip better. Okay, so I ended up going back and painting that inner and outer sides of the frame. The gold was just a little too bright, so I thought this looked much better. Once everything was dry, I set the frame on top just to get an idea of how it would look, but I wasn't really loving that open space underneath. It just looked a little unfinished to me. So I'm going to be using one of these round pieces from this Dollar Tree hanging sign to cover that area and give the frame something solid to rest on. So I just pulled one out, and I'm going to add some spackle to cover up those holes. On top of the frame, I'm going to glue one of these little wood pieces. These came in a pack from Dollar Tree. They were from their Christmas stuff a while back. They're actually little wooden angels, and these always come in handy for crafting, so I always grab a few packs whenever I spot them. I'm going to paint both of them to match, but on the little wood round, I'm just leaving a strip right in the center unpainted. That way the glue has something better to grab onto, and it'll stick a lot stronger. For the strongest hold, you'll want to use something like E6000 and then add a little hot glue for an instant hold while it dries. So I glue the frame on top of the wood round, and then I glue the little wood piece right on top. This turned out so beautiful and elegant. Now you can leave it just like that as a little decorative accent, or you can place a chalkboard back in. It's so pretty for a dessert table, or you can even add a nice photo or some artwork. For the next project, I'll be using 4 of these mini square wood pallets from Dollar Tree. I'm going to transform them into some beautiful coasters. I found these gorgeous napkins at Michael's, and I thought they were just perfect for spring. The soft pastel colors are exactly what I was looking for, and I think they'll look amazing on the wood. I'm going to Mod Podge the napkins onto the pallets using the iron-on method, which makes it super easy to get a smooth finish. So for the first palette, I'm brushing Mod Podge over the entire top, and I'm making sure to apply a nice even layer so the napkin sticks well. I thought it'd be fun to mix things up and give each one a unique design. So on another, I'm just applying Mod Podge on the 3 center slats, and another on the 2 outer ones. And on the last one, I just do every other. So that way each coaster has its own look, but they still feel like a set. And then I just let that Mod Podge dry completely. Before I iron on the napkin, I make sure to separate the layers since it's double ply. You only want to use a top printed layer for this, and so I just carefully peel them apart, and then I cut the napkins to fit over the pallets. Now I'm using my mini heat press on a low setting, but you can also use a regular iron for this step too. To protect the napkin from direct heat, I place a sheet of parchment paper over it.
and then I just gently press down and slowly move the heat press across the surface. The heat reactivates the dried Mod Podge underneath, causing the napkin to adhere perfectly to the wood. I love using the iron-on method because it gives such a smooth, clean, bubble-free finish without the risk of wrinkling or tearing the napkin, and it really helps the design look like it's part of the wood itself. Next, I'm sanding off the overhang to clean up the edges and make everything look nice. I'm using my mini sander for the outer edges, and for those hard to reach spots between the wood slats, I switched to a smaller sanding sheet. I carefully cut between these slats first so I can easily slide the sanding sheet right through. Wow, as I'm sanding, I'm really loving how it's turning out. I'm so glad I decided to mix things up where I place the napkins. It's actually quite satisfying seeing the different designs come together, and you know what, it's looking even better than I imagined. I wanted to have a little storage for the coasters, so I'm using this small wooden crate from Dollar Tree, and it's just the right size. I want to match it with the coasters, so I'm going to do the same thing, applying Mod Podge to the crate, and once that dries, ironing on the napkin to reactivate the Mod Podge, which will adhere the napkin in place. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so next is sanding, and I'm cutting slits between the gaps with a craft knife so I can get a sanding sheet right in between to remove the overhang. The final step is sealing the napkin in place. So I did apply a layer of Mod Podge right on top, and now that it's dry, I'm ironing over it to help flatten any bubbles that may have formed. And you really want to make sure to have a piece of parchment paper in between to protect the napkin, and you also don't want any of that glue getting on your iron. Now this part is optional, but since these are coasters and will be exposed to different temperatures, I decided to add an extra layer of protection by spraying on some spar urethane from Minwax. Especially if you're making these as gifts, that extra layer will just help protect the design and the wood from moisture and heat, so they'll stay looking nice longer. Alright, next I'm adding some cork to the bottom. I get these cork sheets at Dollar Tree, and they're super convenient because they have a sticky back, which makes the whole process so much easier. I'm cutting a few strips from each coaster using a craft knife, sticking 2 strips on the outer edges of the bottom of each coaster, and this will help protect your surfaces from scratches and make sure the coasters don't slip around. Alright, so I thought I was done, but I wanted to take it a step further and make it look even nicer. The crate is a little longer than the pallets, so I wanted to close those gaps up a bit. I decided to trim some bamboo sticks to fit and cover up the gap. I glued them in place, and I really love how it turned out. It just gave everything a more finished, polished look and made the whole thing come together even better. Okay, so out of all the new Dollar Tree peel and stick wallpaper that I got, this one is definitely my absolute favorite. It even has a beautiful metallic shimmer, and I really regret only getting one. Now, I know I wanted to use most of it, if not all of the wallpaper. It was so pretty, and I really didn't want to cut it up. So at the Dollar Tree Plus section, I picked up one of their large fall trays. I was definitely loving the size. Now, it does say it's food safe, which is nice, but the fall design really wasn't my favorite, which was fine because I was planning on covering it up with the peel and stick wallpaper. And that also gives me the option to change it up from time to time. Now the wallpaper covers the surface of the tray lengthwise, but it's about 1/4 of an inch short on the width. So I'm going to paint the surface of the tray, really focusing on the edges. The tray is a little off-white, and so I do try my best to color match. I just added a few drops of gray and beige to white, and it was actually almost a perfect match. Now, just to make sure the pattern underneath doesn't show through, I do also paint the entire surface, just a thin layer to mute it down, because I did notice that on some of the other wallpapers, especially in the areas that were white, it was a little transparent. And once it dries, I just peel back a few inches of the backing paper, and then I just line it up on one side, and then I slowly peel back the bottom paper while smoothing down the wallpaper. And then I just crease the excess on the end, and then I trim it with a craft knife. And that's pretty much it for this one. It's super quick and simple. You can definitely switch out the wallpaper if you want to switch it up. But for now, I really love the pattern on this one. For the next project, I'm going to be making a very quick and simple wreath, and I'll be using this grapevine wreath. I get these at Michael's. They're really not too pricey, and I believe this is the 18-inch one. For flowers, I headed to Dollar Tree as well as Walmart, and I chose more muted down colors for the wreath. I'm starting out with these two greenery bouquets. I really like the shade of green on these, and these are from Walmart. I'm going to slightly bend them to go with the curve of the wreath, and I'm going to position them opposite each other. I'm just tucking it in. I'm not using hot glue only because I'm always reusing the wreath for other projects, and the grapevine wreath is so tightly dense, so it holds pretty well. Next up are these lavender bunch from Dollar Tree. These are so pretty, and I positioned them right on top of the greenery, tucking them into the wreath. I do make sure to leave a little space in the center. I'll be placing 3 flowers in the center, 2 ivory and 1 peach. These are also from Dollar Tree, and these I do secure with a little hot glue. Next up, I'll be using this Dollar Tree rectangle wood slice, as well as these poster stickers from Dollar Tree as well. I'll be spelling out the word hello, but before I peel and stick them, I'm going to distress it a bit. And all I'm doing is just getting a little sanding sheet and lightly going over the letters. That will scratch it up, letting that white underneath show through. And then you just want to lightly wipe it down to remove any black dust. I started out with the middle letter L, and I placed that right in the center, and then I just worked my way out, peeling the letters out and then sticking them on the wood. The stickiness in the back isn't really strong, so you're going to need to seal it in place once you're done placing the letters. Next, I'm going to secure it right in the center of the wreath. I do remove that jute string hanger, but you can leave that on and find a place to hook it on the wreath directly as well. I just rest it on the wreath, and then I put a little hot glue to hold it in place. And this simple wreath DIY is done, and I love the way it turned out. For the next DIY, I'll be using 4 of these corrugated metal frames from Dollar Tree. I'll be gluing these together to form a cube. To make sure everything lays flat when I glue them, I'm just removing a couple of the metal tabs on the side. Now I could have removed the little stand on the back too, but instead I just added a little hot glue to hold it down in place, and that works too. Before I glue them all together, I just wanted to share a couple other ways you can glue these frames together. You can glue them side by side to make a long rectangular piece. It already has metal clips on it, so you could totally use it to hang little notes or recipes or even small printed photos. Or another cute option is to glue 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. I like that too. It'd be cute in an office, kitchen, or even by the entryway for reminders and to-dos. Okay, so for this DIY, I'm going to glue the frames together to form a square. I'm just applying hot glue to one side of a frame and then attaching the end of another frame to form an L shape. Then I do the same thing with the third frame to create a U shape. For the final one, I apply hot glue to the 2 outer edges and press it into the U-shaped frames to close it all up into a cube. Now to make the base for this, I'm using one of these wood planks from Dollar Tree that I already had on hand, but you can totally use whatever scrap wood you've got or skip the base altogether if you prefer. It's totally up to you, and it still works out. Once that's measured and trimmed, I just flip the frames over and glue it right in place. And this one's all done. You can place some faux flowers in the center or drop in a vase with some fresh flowers. I also love these clips. You can clip in some photos, your favorite verse, or even tuck in a small flower or 2. I really love how this one turned out. I love crafting with Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting boards. They're made of real bamboo and have such a nice smooth finish, which makes them perfect for all kinds of DIY decor. So when I saw that my store finally had the new larger size in stock, I was so excited, and of course I grabbed a bunch. For the first DIY, I'll be using 1 bamboo cutting board, and I just love that there's more room to work with. I'll also be using one of these mini wood pallets from Dollar Tree. Now I got this vintage floral rub-on transfer from Amazon, and the design is really pretty. It came with 3 different sheets, and honestly I love the print on all of them. I've actually never used this rub-on transfer before, so this is my first time trying it out, and I'm hoping all goes well.
Right now, I'm just trying to decide which one to cut out, and honestly, that might be the hardest part. They're all so pretty, and I kind of want to use them all. Now, I'm going to apply the transfer above where I just placed a palette, so not the whole board, just that top section. And I'm keeping that in mind as I choose the design. I really like this section here with the bird and the flower, so I carefully cut that out. Next, I just flip the transfer over, peel off the white backing paper, and place it down right where I want it to go. Then I just use that little stick it came with to rub the design onto the board. I start by rubbing over the whole image first to help hold it in place. Then I carefully lift one corner and slowly peel it back. If a part doesn't transfer right away, I just lay it back down and then I just keep rubbing over it until it does. Now there was a little spot that no matter how much I tried, I just could not get it to transfer. I don't know if it was the board or the transfer itself, but in the end it was fine, so it did blend. And so I'm just tapping along the edges, making sure it's fully down and everything's stuck in place. Now you'll want to seal it, and you can use any water-based sealer like Mod Podge just to help protect the transfer and keep it from peeling over time. Next I'm going to paint the wood palette in the shade Seaside Blue from Deco Art, but really you can use any color you like. Just about anything will complement the wood beautifully. These Dollar Tree foam brushes aren't the sturdiest. They bend pretty easily when you apply pressure, so it can be a little tricky, but they do the job. So I'm painting the front of the palette, but then I remembered that I actually wanted to use the back as the front. And so I flipped it over and painted that side as well. I just like how this side looked better with the two vertical wood pieces. It adds a nice detail. I'm also going to be elevating it slightly with some tower blocks underneath, so having a flat surface on the back will just make it easier to glue. To lift up the palette, I'm using 6 tower blocks and I'm gluing them together end to end in pairs, so I'll have 3 sets total. You could also use square dowels or any small wood pieces you have on hand, just something to give it a little height. And I'm just brushing on some of that blue paint. Now I will be adding glue on the narrower sides of the blocks, so those sides I want to keep unpainted. I also lightly sanded the part of the palette where I painted and I plan to add glue to. You know, it's always better to glue directly onto bare wood for a stronger hold. And then I'm just gluing the blocks on the palette like a U. And I'm gluing the vertical ones behind the ones in front to conceal it. I wanted to distress the palette a bit, just lightly, so I'm going in with my little finger sander and I'm sanding down the edges here and there. I'm also hitting a few spots on the surface just to rough it up a bit and give it more texture. Although I kind of wish I'd stained the palette a bit darker first, just so the distressing would stand out more, especially against this beautiful blue. I'm just adding some glue to the back of the palette. I really like using this glue from Type On. It holds really well. You can definitely use hot glue too, especially if you're not planning to put anything too heavy inside. To hang this up, I've just been loving these Command Velcro strips, and I love that they're removable. You're not left with holes on your wall. Now this stuff usually sticks to anything, but for whatever reason, it would just not hold well on this board, so just give the wood a good cleaning or even a quick sanding on that spot, or you can do what I did and add a strip of hot glue and that'll help stick it better. And we're all done. I really love that little pocket space where I can tuck in some greenery or faux flowers. It's such an easy way to add something pretty to the wall without taking up much space. For the next project, I'll be using this hanging sign from Dollar Tree. I wanted to use up some of that leftover scrap paper from the previous project, so I thought it'd be fun to turn the circle sign into a cute set of coasters. So first I'm just cutting apart the sign to separate the rounds. Then I'm just using pliers to roll out the string. It's stapled in there pretty well, but once I got that part loosened, it made it way easier to get my staple remover underneath and pop out the staples. Next I'm placing the circles over the peel and stick paper and positioning them where I can get a bit of that gold leaf design inside the shape. And I'm just kind of moving them around a bit to catch the prettiest part of the pattern. Then I just lightly mark around the circle, just going a little past the edge, and then I cut it out. After that, I peel off the backing paper and carefully place it right on top of the round. I just take my time here, smoothing it out as I go and making sure there's no bubbles. Okay, next, I'm taking my little sander and removing the overhang. I make sure to sand downward only, otherwise it can scratch up some of that design, and we don't want that. And this step really gives it a nice clean edge all the way around. I'll be sealing it with some Mod Podge. This one's from Dollar Tree and I'm using the glossy one. I did test out both the matte and the gloss, and you know, they look pretty similar in the finish, so I just went with a glossy. They do also have a dishwasher safe version, which is definitely a more durable finish. I'll be adding some cork on the bottom for a little extra grip. I get these cork sheets at Dollar Tree, and you can definitely cut out a full circle to cover the entire bottom, but I decided to just cut a few small strips and place them right across the bottom instead. Quick and easy, and it still does the job. I'll be letting it dry overnight and then giving it a quick spray with a spray sealer. And this one is all done. Dollar Tree has these adorable decorative bead dishware, and I really love the pattern and the colors. And for this project, I grabbed a plate and a bowl. And just like the previous DIY, there are so many options. You can place a bowl below, and I love how the base matches, or place a candlestick in between. This is another Dollar Tree taper candlestick, and it's just so dainty and pretty. But for this project, I wanted to add some wood elements to it. I'll be using a couple of these 1x2 inch wood from Dollar Tree. I'll be making a wood base, and I'll be gluing these two pieces into a cross. And so I mark the length of the plate and I add a little more above that just to give some cushion. Now you'll actually need a total of 3 1x2s, and here are the measurements that I trimmed them to. To assemble, I lay the wood pieces flat and I glue the 2, 4, and 5/8 pieces towards the center sides of the 10-inch piece to form a cross. I'm using Titebond quick and thick glue for this project. For the smaller pieces, I'll be gluing them upright on the ends of the cross. So I'm just adding a little bit of glue on the smaller pieces. You can also apply it on the 4 ends of the cross first and then attach the smaller pieces. You do have a little time before the glue dries completely. So once that's assembled, I let that dry. Now, aside from painting or staining, this is pretty much done, and you can definitely leave it as is. But you know, I thought this would look even better with a little elevation and height. So I had a few options with what I already had on hand. The first was this round 5-inch pine wood. Now I really liked the way this looked, especially with the plate on top, but you know, I had this whole other plan for it already, which you'll see in a minute. Instead, I decided to go with this hexagon shaped wood from Dollar Tree, which I already had. And you know what? It looked just as awesome on top. So I just apply some glue to attach them together, and I make sure it's centered. Now for part 2 of this project, I'll be making a base for the bowl. So for that, I'll be using the 5-inch round pine wood and 4 tumbling tower blocks. Okay, so all I'll be doing for this simple base is glue the blocks equally spaced out all around. I just add a little bit of glue on the block, and then I just attach that onto the sides of the wood round. And this wood round is just a perfect size for the bowl. Once the bases have completely dried, I give them a light sanding to remove any glue in the joints that may have seeped out. I'll be staining them, and I'll be using this gel stain from Deco Art in the shade Walnut. So I'm using a brush to apply the color. Now, even though I did lightly sand over the hexagon, the color did go on a bit spotty in some areas. I don't know, maybe it was some sticky residue or some grease left behind, but whatever it was, I did go back to try to correct it. I tried sanding it a bit and then restaining it just so it blended better. I do apply the stain in small sections, and then I wipe it down immediately before it dries so that you can see that wood grain even more underneath. So I just continue applying the stain all over in small sections and then wiping it down. You can paint or stain this any color you like. You could choose a lighter stain or paint it a beautiful olive color. The choice is yours, so get creative and make it match your style perfectly. With a smaller base, I stain it that same walnut stain, applying with a brush and then wiping it down immediately before it dries. I also made sure to apply it on the sides and the blocks. Seal it with your preferred sealer, and this DIY is done. The wood just complements the ceramic plate beautifully, and because the plate and bowl isn't glued down, you can easily switch it out anytime. Alright, now that we've got our creative juices flowing, let's see what else we can create with these baskets. For the next DIY, I'll be using this cream colored woven basket, and this one is slightly bigger than the ones I previously used. I'll also be using some nautical rope from Dollar Tree as well, and I'm going to make this basket even bigger.
So the first thing, I'm going to get the rope and I'm going to wrap it along the top of the basket. You'll see where the straw basket ends on the top, and that's where I'm going to place and hot glue the nautical rope. I'm just going to continue wrapping along the top, which will extend the size of the basket. So I'm just working in sections, applying some glue and adhering the nautical rope on top. Now, I really love doing this simple hack. It's super easy, but it adds such a nice detail. Now, I'm just using one of these Dollar Tree nautical ropes, but you can definitely add another one if you want it to be even larger. It blends nicely, and you have a pretty sturdy base because of that woven basket right under. I'm going to wrap the nautical rope about 4 times around, and I'm going to cut an end directly above where I first started. That way it's pretty even all around. And then I just glue that in place. Now I love how this looks, and you can leave it like that, but I'm going to add some fun decorative details to this. So to do that, I'll be using some white yarn and a plastic yarn needle. Now I like using these plastic yarn needles for this project because it's flexible, but you can use whatever you have on hand to weave the yarn through the rope. I'm going to be cutting out about 9 pieces of the string, each of them about 3 feet in length. And so I string through one of the cut yarns through the needle and I tie a little knot to hold it in place. And then I just start wrapping it around the rope. And so I poke through or push through the needle right under the top first row of rope, and I loop it over, pulling it all the way through, leaving about 1 inch or so of the end, and I'm just holding that end in place horizontally towards the right. You can dab some glue if you want, but I'm just going to be wrapping the yarn around it, and that will hold it in place. So I just continue looping that yarn over that first row of rope, and I do that 4 times. Then I move on to looping the yarn over 2 rows, and I do that 4 times as well. After that, I loop it 4 times again over 3 rows, and you can already see a beautiful pattern forming. After that, I just mirror the previous loops, looping 4 over 2 rows, and then 4 over the top single row. Once you're done with the pattern, you can hot glue it in place, but what I like to do is tuck that inside the loops so that you can't see it. And then I just continue on making the same pattern. I do space them about 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch apart. Now you can get really creative with these patterns. You can experiment with different combinations and spacing. I'm starting with a sequence, but feel free to adjust it to your liking. However you decide to do it, I think it'll add a really nice detail to the basket. It's all about what looks good to you. If you want a bolder look, you can use thicker yarn or even double up the layers. If you prefer something more subtle, you can space out the wraps a bit more. Either way, it's going to give your basket a unique and handmade touch. Now, a quick tip, if you decide to add this detail, you really don't need to go too heavy on the hot glue because the loops will hold it in place, and that will just make it a little easier to push the needle through. And there you have it. Our basket is all done, and I'm really loving how this one turned out. The yarn adds such a beautiful texture and gives the basket a beautiful custom look. For the next DIY, I was inspired by these blue terracotta clay vases from Pottery Barn. I love the soft textured look they have, and I thought it'd be fun to try to make my own version using Dollar Tree supplies. I'll be using one of their glass vases with the flared top. First, I gave it a good cleaning to make sure it was free of any dust or oils. Now you can spray paint it with primer first to help the paint stick even better, but I'm going to go ahead and paint it directly using some chalk paint mixed with baking soda to give it that nice textured clay-like finish I'm going for. I'm starting off with some white chalk paint and adding a good amount of baking soda. I want the mixture to be pretty thick, so I just keep adding baking soda until it gets nice and chunky. I'm using a round sponge brush to apply it, and I'm just pouncing it all over the vase. These sponge brushes are honestly my favorite for this kind of project because the paint goes on super thick and it gives great coverage really fast. I usually only need no more than 2 coats to get it fully covered. I just love all the texture this gives. That paint mixture really makes it feel like a clay or pottery piece. And once everything was dry, I'll be lightly brushing on some blue.
Now I wanted the blue to be a little softer, so I added some white to lighten it up. After mixing up the blue color, I grabbed the synthetic paintbrush from Dollar Tree. It's perfect for this part because I really want to see those big brush strokes show up. So I'm just dipping the brush into the paint and lightly brushing it across the vase, working horizontally all the way around. So I just keep working my way around, adding light strokes until I like how it's looking. And if it goes on a little too heavy in some areas, that's totally fine, because after that, I'm gonna go back over any harsh areas with some white paint to soften it up. So I just keep going back and forth with the blue and the white until I like the way it looks. Once I'm happy with the finish, I just do a quick spray of sealer to protect it, and this one's done. For the next DIY, I'm using this thick square wood piece. I just wanted to deepen the color a bit, so I'm mixing together that same warm neutral combo from earlier and thinning it out with a little water so it goes on like a stain. So I'm just brushing the paint on and wiping it down immediately. Acrylic paint dries really fast, so I'm just making sure to wipe it down right away. And I'm applying the paint on all sides, top and bottom. A few videos back, I made some DIYs using these beautiful rub-on transfers I found on Amazon, and I'll link that below. And I had a bunch left over, and I thought they'd look so stunning on the wood. So I really like this section with the flowers and the butterfly, and it has that beautiful vintage look. It's so pretty. So I'm just trimming that section out, and I want to make sure it fits nicely on the wood square. To apply it, I just peel off the white backing paper and place the transfer onto the wood. At this point, I can still move it around a bit to get it in the right spot before it sticks. It comes with a little wooden stick, so I start by rubbing over the whole design a few times to help it stay in place. Now I thought I should trim out that overhang before continuing because I didn't want any of that transfer hanging off the edges or tearing as I peeled it back. So I focused on one corner, rubbing firmly and slowly lifting the top plastic sheet as I go. If any part doesn't transfer, I just lay it back down and rub it again until it sticks completely. Then I just lightly tap over the whole design with my fingers, pressing it down gently to make sure every little part is fully stuck to the wood and nothing is lifting or peeling up. There was a little piece of the transfer I trimmed off earlier, and I decided to use it to fill in a spot that looked a bit empty to help balance everything. I'm adding some wooden beads to the bottom to give it a little lift, and just hot gluing one to each of the four corners underneath. And finally, to seal and protect the transfer, I'm brushing on some Mod Podge over the top. And that's it! This one's all done, and I love how it turned out. Alright, this DIY is a super quick one. I grabbed 3 of Dollar Tree's black pillar candle pedestals for this. They always have a bunch of different styles. You'll probably see some white ones too, so just grab whatever 3 you like best, as long as the 3 match. I'm also going to be using a couple of these dark votive candle holders. I just really love the look of these. For the pedestals, I'm gluing 2 of them together to make one long one. I'm just lining up the bottoms, adding some glue, and sticking them together. Super easy. And then I'm placing the glass candle holder on top. You can either permanently glue them in place with E6000 or just add a little hot glue so you can mix and match and pop it out whenever you want to change it up. And because Dollar Tree has a big variety of votive candle holders, there's so many different ways you can switch them up for a few dollars. For this DIY, I'll be using several of these greenery bushes from Dollar Tree. I'll use about 3 for this project. I really love how they look, and I think they're definitely some of the more realistic looking ones. I'll also be using one of Dollar Tree's large woven baskets. I thought this size was perfect, but you can definitely use any basket or tray you have on hand. For the first look, I'll be using some battery operated pillar candles. I got the 2 larger ones at Walmart a while back, and I wish I picked up a smaller one to create a trio for this project, but since I don't have one, I'll be using Dollar Tree's small white pillar candles instead. And I'm placing the 3 pillar candles in the center of the basket. I'll be placing the greenery bush around the candles, and I'm just bending the greenery to follow the shape of the basket. So I'm just laying these down, and I'm using 3 for this, but if you want a fuller look, you can definitely add 1 or 2 more. The greenery already has a nice full look on its own, so 3 felt just right for me. Next, I wanted to add some of these white flowers from Dollar Tree to the greenery. I thought I would just pull off a few and scatter them all around to add a little extra fullness and texture. It's such a simple step, but it really makes the whole arrangement come together nicely. You can totally make this as colorful as you want. I'm keeping it simple with the white flowers for a soft, neutral look, but this would also be gorgeous with some pinks and purples, or even little yellow flowers for a bright, cheerful pop. Another way you can style this is by placing the candles inside some cylinder vases, which just adds a beautiful touch. I'm using 3 vases from Dollar Tree in different heights to add some variation. Now, I started with my original 3 candles in the vases, but a couple of them ended up being too big, so I decided to switch to 3 smaller pillar candles that I got at Dollar Tree. I'm adding white rocks to the vases first. Since the vases are different heights, I want to adjust the candles so they're not all the same level. And these white rocks are from Dollar Tree, but you can also use Epsom salt or some shells or even wooden beads. I think any of those would work perfectly. And so now I just place the candles in the vases and I set them in the center of the basket. I love how simple yet elegant this looks. It really came together nicely.
For this DIY, you're going to need 1 bamboo cutting board from Dollar Tree and a couple 12-inch 1x2s, which you can find in the Dollar Tree wood section. I'm going to be making a hanging wooden wall pocket. I'm going to measure the height and I mark where I want to trim it. So for this, I'm trimming so that I have 2 at about 7 3/4 of an inch and 1 at 4 inches for that bottom horizontal section. So here they are, trimmed and ready to go. And I just use a miter box and saw. Dollar Tree wood is really easy to cut through. I'll be painting the wood with this chalk paint from Waverly in the shade Sandstone. So I'm just taking note of the areas where I'll be applying the glue, and I make sure to avoid painting those areas. I'll also be painting a small section on the front of the bamboo, so I tape about 2 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, also making sure to tape off the sides. And I'm just making sure that there's no bubbles. I'm just pushing down on the tape because I don't want any of that paint getting underneath. Because I want full coverage, I'll be applying the paint with a round sponge brush. For the first layer, I start by brushing or dragging the sponge brush downward away from the tape. After that, I just start pouncing the brush all over, still being extra careful around that taped area, applying light coats and just pouncing very lightly as well. So far no streaks and it's going on evenly. I also make sure to paint the sides. Once that's completely painted, I carefully remove the tape and thank goodness the paint didn't bleed through. To assemble, I flip the board over and then I apply some glue. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick and I apply that on the narrow unpainted sides of the trimmed 1x2s. And then I just attach them onto the board. Now to make sure they dry equally spaced, I take the extra 4-inch cut wood and I place that towards the center. And then I just attach the rest of the 1x2s so that it forms a U shape. I do clamp them together and I let that dry completely. To seal, I took it outside and I used a spray sealer from Cricut. To hang, I'll be attaching a couple triangle hangers using a ruler to make sure they're placed evenly. And that's it for this one. You can place some flowers or greenery stems. You can also make a matching pair. I really loved how this turned out. Now while I was at Dollar Tree, one of their napkins caught my attention. It had a beautiful blue tropical design and I wanted to use it for this project. I also picked up their clear decorative cake plate with a scallop edge. First thing I'm going to do is give the plate a coat of white acrylic paint and I'm using Apple Barrel's white. I'll also apply the white paint on the back and I only apply it up to that scalloped area. I'm going to decoupage the napkin onto the plate, so first I'll remove that extra layer behind the napkin and separate it. To make it easier to work with, I place a plate on top of the napkin and I trim off some of that excess. I leave about 1.5 inches of extra napkin all around. Once I got that cut, I'll be applying some Mod Podge all over the top surface of the plate. I just drizzle that right on top and then I use a brush to spread it out. Now another option, you can also skip painting the plate and this will give a more translucent finish, which is also nice. Because the edges curve a bit and it's not completely flat, I decided to start in the flat center and work my way out, and this way the napkin won't get caught on the edges and rip as I lay it down. Once the napkin is in place, I gently smooth it down with my fingers. I also use a clear plastic sheet to press it down, which helps to smooth it out without breaking the napkin. And then I just finish off the edges, applying more Mod Podge on the edges and then smoothing it out, gently pressing down with my fingers and a clear plastic. I want the napkin to cover the sides of the plate, showing off the scallop edge, so I turn the plate over and I apply that Mod Podge on the edge, making sure the napkin completely covers the sides. And then I just apply another layer of Mod Podge right on top of the plate. And this will help to seal in that napkin and protect the surface of the plate. I also make sure to cover the sides with Mod Podge as well. I let that Mod Podge dry completely and I leave it overnight, and this gives the wrinkles and bubbles time to smooth out. Now once that's completely dry, I just get a small piece of sanding sheet and I remove the excess napkin along the edges. I also use a little emery board, and that just helps get in between those scallop edges. It actually removes the napkin nicely. For the base, I grabbed a pack of these plastic bowls from Dollar Tree. These actually have a nice detailing on them. I'll be using one, and I'm just going to paint the inside white, and I'm going to leave the outer part of the bowl unpainted. Because it's clear, the white shows through, and I don't have to worry about the paint chipping. Next, I'm going to glue the plate right on top, but as I was looking at it, I thought it was just too short. You couldn't really see the base, and so I decided to stack another bowl on top. So I just painted another bowl white on the inside, and then I glued the bottoms together. Then I applied some more glue, E6000, on that raised part of the rim of the bowl, and I just attached that onto the bottom of the plate. I give that time to dry and set. And I really loved how it turned out. For the next DIY, I'll be using these Dollar Tree rectangle wood slice. These are about 9 inches in length, and I'm going to be making a beautiful rustic riser. I'll be using this 1-inch square dowel. I get these at Home Depot, and I'm going to trim that so that I have 2 to just a little over 3 inches. But another option that will still work if you want to keep it simple, you can use 4 tumbling tower blocks, glue 2 pieces together, and no cutting required. I'll also be using 4 of these wooden cubes from Dollar Tree. Now it's important that they're all equal in height or else you'll have an uneven riser. So I'm just sorting out 4 that are equal. I'm going to remove that jute hanger. The staples are on there pretty good, so I had to use a very strong staple remover to pry it out. Next, I'm going to attach the base. So I have the bottom facing up, and I'm going to add some glue on one side of that cut square dowel. And I place that close to the edge. Not all the way, I do leave a little space, about 1/2 inch. I glue the other end, just making sure it's placed about the same distance from the end as the other one. I'm using Type-On multi-surface glue, but you can also use hot glue. I just like that extra repositioning time. I'm going to glue the cubes on top of the square wood close to the ends. This just gives it a little more height, and it's a nice little detail to the base. I give it about a minute or 2 to bond, and then I flip it over and I put some weight on top. And I just let that dry completely. I'm going to stain the riser, and I'll be using this water-based stain in the shade Special Walnut. I wipe the color on, and then I also wipe down the excess. Now you can paint or stain this any color, but I really love the rustic look of the stain. I also make sure to paint the base. Now you don't have to, but I also stain the bottom. And this rustic riser is done. Dollar Tree has a wide variation of frames, so I grabbed a variety of frames for today's video. So for the first project, I will be using the simple white 8x10 inch frame, about 9 tumbling tower blocks, and this wood plank, all from Dollar Tree. I'm going to be trimming the plank to the width of the frame, so I lay that on top to measure, and I trim that to about 9 5/8 of an inch. Next, I'm going to turn the frame over and I carefully remove the backing board and the glass. With some pliers, I pull out all of the metal tabs. I'll be gluing the blocks on the wood towards the bottom edge. So I add some hot glue on the narrow side of a block and I place that down horizontally on the bottom corner of the plank like so. And then I add some glue on another block and I place that vertically right on top, also gluing them to each other. And then place another block right on top of that like so. And then I glue some more blocks just like that on the opposite side. Next, I'm just gluing more blocks on the bottom edge, gluing them on the wood and to each other. It's not going to be a perfect fit, there will be some gaps, at least for one block. But everything else, I make sure to connect them to each other. I'll be painting the wood and the blocks white. I'm just using Apple Barrel's white acrylic paint. And I just brush that on all over the front and the sides. But you know, you can paint this any color or even stain it. It would make a nice contrast to the white frame. Next, I'll be using some giant craft sticks. These are about 10 inches and I get these at Walmart. I'm going to trim them so that they fit nicely in the back of the frame where the backing board and glass usually sit. So I mark that and I just use scissors to trim them down. I want the wood to be a nice contrast. I'm going to stain them with this gel stain in the shade Walnut from Deco Art. So I brush that on and then I wipe it down. I'll be using hot glue to glue the craft sticks on the frame, but for the strongest hold, because of the material of the frame, I definitely recommend using a stronger glue like E6000, otherwise it can pop off. So I'm just placing them on the back of the frame and positioning them, spacing them out evenly. And once I have them where I want them to be, I glue them down. Now I ended up using 6 craft sticks, but if you want a tighter fit, you can add one more. So here's how the frame is looking. I really love the contrast. And finally, I apply some glue on the blocks and then I place that on the front of the frame, making sure it's flush on the bottom. I'm going to have this stand, but you can also attach some jute cord on the back if you want it to hang. Now you can add some stenciling on the front, add some wording, but I wanted to keep this one simple, just like that. Add some flowers and greenery and the simple DIY is done. For the next DIY, I'm putting together a cute little recipe stand, and I'll be using Dollar Tree's bamboo cutting board. I'll also be pairing it with one of their 1x2 inch wood pieces. I'll be trimming the wood to the width of the board, so I just mark it, grab my little miter box and saw, and I cut it down. These pieces aren't super dense, so they're actually pretty easy to cut through. I'll be staining the wood using that same combo of Apple Barrel's acrylic paint from the last DIY. So burnt umber will be my base color. Then I'm adding a little nutmeg brown to lighten it up and bring in some warmth. And since I'll be deepening it with a bit of black, I'll also mix in just a tiny bit of brown oxide to keep that earthy warmth. Then I just add a splash of water to thin it down so it brushes on more like a stain. For the cutting board, I'm just using a cloth to apply the stain instead of a brush, so I just work in small sections, wiping the mix on and then flipping it to a clean side of the cloth to wipe it off right away. Now I've made something similar in the past with their smaller cutting board and I wanted to make a larger one. Next I apply the stain onto the cut piece of wood and I decided to go a little darker on this one for some contrast, and I believe I added a little more black and brown oxide to the mix as well. And these dried down so beautifully. Next, I add some glue onto the 1x2 and attach it to the board, making sure it's standing upright and flush along the bottom. And then I just clamp it in place and let it dry completely. I thought it'd be nice to add some hardware to hold a phone or tablet or even a recipe book in place, and I love these metal drawer pulls from Dollar Tree. I thought the gold was just perfect and it really elevated the whole thing. It does come with screws, but I'm just using E6000 to hold it in place. I wanted to have the option to recline it back a bit, so I'm gluing one of these small chalkboard easels from Dollar Tree onto the back. I love this little hack, it's super easy, and once it's glued on, it's actually really sturdy. I use a combo of E6000 and hot glue so it holds strong right away, but it also sets permanently.
The last time I made one of these, I added some stenciling, but honestly, I really love this version just the way it is. But if you want to quickly dress it up, some nice options are those Dollar Tree puffy metallic stickers. You can add one or several, and it can add a little pop of character or make it feel a bit more custom. Just reinforce it with some glue. But for me, I'm keeping it as is. It's simple and understated, but in a really elegant way. For the next DIY, I'll be using another one of these Dollar Tree bamboo cutting boards. I'm making a pretty little tray with gold handles, and I wanted to use a rub-on transfer again for this. They're just so pretty. I'll have that Amazon link below if you want to check it out. So here, I'm just trying to decide which part of the design I like, whether I'm going to cover the whole surface or just a small part. And I decided to go with this section right here, and so I just carefully trim it out with an X-Acto knife. I'll be using a couple of these gold metal pools from Dollar Tree. They also had black ones too, which was such a nice find. Definitely one of those things I don't always see, so I grabbed a few while I could. So before I rub on the transfer, I just want to get an idea of placement with the pools. There's a pretty little bird there and I don't want to cover up its head. Now I thought it was a little too long, so I thought I'd cut out a line of the wording in the middle just so I can bring the two main designs a little closer and avoid the handle going over it. And I'm just trimming some of the writings around the flowers just so that it's not too boxy. And then I remove that white backing paper of the rub-on design and I place them down on the board with the design side facing up. I'm using the wooden stick that it came with to apply the transfer on the wood, and I start out going over the whole design, and this just helps getting it to stick initially, and so that way it doesn't move around. Now it was looking a bit uneven by the bird. There was this big empty spot on the top right, and so I just cut up some of that wording I had trimmed off earlier, and I stuck a few pieces to extend it. I thought that balanced it out a lot better. So I just keep rubbing over the design while slowly lifting it up. If any spots didn't transfer as I went, I would just lay it back down, rub over that area again, and then keep lifting until the whole design was fully transferred. Once the transfer is on, you can go over it with a layer of matte Mod Podge just to seal it in and keep it from peeling or scratching off later. Now, I would have loved to screw on the handles, but the screws that came with them are just too long for the cutting board. You could use shorter screws and add some adhesive bumpers underneath, but for this one, I'm just going to glue the handles on instead. I'm also going to elevate the tray with some square dowels that I trimmed down a fit, which I'll be placing underneath. I'm going to paint it just to add a little color and contrast. This is khaki chalk paint from Craftsmart. It's a very neutral color, but I could definitely see this looking great in bolder colors too. Once the paint has dried, I glue it right underneath, about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. For the handle, I'll be using E6000 for a super strong hold. And I try to place that right above where I place the dowels. And this one is all done. Let me know what you think. For this project, I'll be using 4 of these 9 by 11 inch gold frames from Dollar Tree. Now, I love that they individually wrap most of the frames at Dollar Tree, but once I removed the wrapping, there were still some scratches on it, but that was okay. So I'm just removing the backing board and the frame on all of the glass. I'll be placing them back, so I just put them to the side for now. I'll be gluing the frames together just like this, which I could have also done first, but before I do that, I'm going to brush this Faux Art metallic paint in the shade Antique Gold over the frames. I didn't really like the current gold shade, and I wanted it to have more of an antique gold finish. I also go over that black inner border to tone it down and match. Now, I only apply about 1 to 2 coats. Since the frame is already gold, that's enough. You can still see some of the scratches underneath with just a couple coats, which was fine because it really gave it that antique finish. Once the paint has dried, I turn the frames over. Now, they're not all exactly equal in size. They're pretty close, but I did have to move them around until the size looked as flush as possible. But one tip is to just double check before purchasing. I didn't think about that. I'll be using a combination of E6000 and hot glue to glue together. The hot glue just helps to clamp them together while the E6000 dries.
Take your time with that, hold them together for a few minutes until the hot glue dries completely. Or if you want a more clean, tight finish, skip the hot glue. Clamping is a little tricky, but you can place some small blocks on the sides to give the clamp some grip. No, you can't stop here. I think this is so pretty just like that. But I'll be applying this beautiful vintage looking wallpaper on the glass. I got this on Temu a while back. You can also get this pattern on Amazon. Dollar Tree also has some nice wallpaper as well. So I'm just measuring the amount that I need and then I cut it out. Since I'll be placing these on top of the glass, I cut them in 4 equal parts. So to place over the glass, I just carefully peel out a few inches of that white backing paper. It is very sticky and the wallpaper can rip if I'm not careful, so I peel that off very carefully. And then I just stick that on the edge of the glass and then I slowly peel out the backing paper, smoothing the wallpaper down. I'm also using a little plastic scraper to smooth it out as I'm pulling out the white backing paper, and this will help prevent any bubbles from forming. And once that's completely on, I continue to go over that with a plastic scraper. I get these at Dollar Tree. They're very similar to the Cricut one, but at a fraction of the cost. So I just continue applying the wallpaper to the remaining of the glass until all 4 are completely covered. Now these plastic frames are a bit flimsy, and since I'm going to be applying the glass back, I wanted to add some more support. I'll be gluing these bamboo sticks on the joints. I get these on Amazon and I'll be using a combination of hot glue and E6000 to glue them in place. Once I apply the glue, I hold the bamboo sticks down for about a minute to give that hot glue some time to dry and harden. I also use a square dowel to hold it down evenly while it dries. And then I just place the glass with the wallpaper back on the frames, as well as the backing board, and then I just push down those metal tabs to secure it in place. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, can you make sure to give it a thumbs up? Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Your support is so appreciated. I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about what DIY projects you'd like to see in the future. And with that, we are done, and it really came together beautifully.
Project, I'll be using 3 of Dollar Tree's 6-inch palettes and 2 of the square ones. I'm going to stain them with this water-based stain from Varathane in the shade Dark Walnut, but you can definitely stain or paint them whatever color you prefer. Now this stain goes on really smoothly with a brush and it's super easy to work with, and since it has poly in it, it also seals it, which makes it even more durable. I'm also using a smaller brush to get into those hard to reach areas, like in between the slats and inside these square palettes, to make sure I cover every little area. I'll be adding some stenciling on one of the rectangle palettes. I got this really adorable floral stencil sheet at Walmart, and I'll be stenciling in a floral design on the wood. So I'm just positioning that in place and then taping it down. I'll be using white chalk paint from Waverly. I start by adding a small amount of paint to my brush, then carefully dabbing off the excess to avoid any bleeding under the stencil. It's always best to apply the paint in light, even layers, and this will just help build up the color gradually, giving you more control and a cleaner finish. So here's how it looks. I really love the details. It just adds that really nice touch. Now I'm going to start assembling the palettes to form a box or a little crate. So I begin by applying wood glue to the ends of one of the rectangular palettes. Then I attach the square palettes to each side, pressing them firmly into place and double checking that everything lines up. Next I grab another rectangle palette, add glue to the ends, and repeat the process attaching it to the sides of the square palettes. I make sure everything is snug and secure, and I also use some tape to clamp and hold everything in place while the glue sets. Finally, I add glue along the bottom edges and I attach that to the last palette, which will be the base, pressing it down carefully to make sure it's fully attached. And that's it. It comes together so easily, but the end result is so beautiful. It makes a perfect little rustic box that you can use organizing small items or even a centerpiece.
I wanted to add a little decorative touch to this book by covering it with one of the peel and stick wallpapers. And I really wanted to cover it with that same one from the prior DIY, the pink flowers and the bluebirds. So the next day I headed to my local Dollar Tree to pick up another one, but unfortunately they were all out, so instead I got my next favorite design. First, I lay the wallpaper face down and I place a book right on top. And then I fold the wallpaper over the book, making sure the ends are even so that the center of the wallpaper is over the spine of the book. And this is also a good way to make sure your book will be fully covered. Then I fold the excess inside the edge of the book cover. I turn the book over and I do the same thing on the other side, tucking that excess paper inside the book cover. Before I start adhering the wallpaper, I'm going to cut out the corners like so. And this will make it look neater and easier to work with. I'm also cutting 2 slits on the paper along the spine of the book. So to stick the paper on the book, I'm going to start on one end, peeling out that white backing paper and sticking it over the top cover. And I just keep pulling out that backing paper until one side is completely covered. And then I flip the book over and cover the other side, slowly peeling out the backing paper. It does help to crease it down. Just slowly peel it out while smoothing the paper down. And then I just fold in the top and bottom flaps. But before I fold in the side flaps, I cut the corners at an angle, and this will give it a nice clean finish. And then I fold that side flap down and tuck it inside the cover. I repeat this on the other side, cutting the corners at an angle. For the spine, I trim the excess wallpaper so there's just enough to cover it, and then I fold it down. And that finishes it off nicely. Well, I definitely prefer using a peel and stick over regular paper because it really looks like it's part of the book's original design. I wanted to add a little decorative touch to this book by covering it with one of the peel and stick design.
DIY, I grabbed some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope. Now these ropes have a lot of little fibers sticking out, so I carefully ran a small candle lighter over the surface to lightly singe them off and clean it up, but you can totally just do that in the end when it's all done, or skip it completely if you don't mind the fuzz. Okay, to start, I added a little hot glue to the end of the rope and began rolling it tightly into a spiral, kind of like a cinnamon roll. Make sure to hold that starting end down firmly for a few seconds to keep it tight. After that, I just kept adding small lines of hot glue as I worked my way around, pressing the rope into place a little at a time. You don't need a ton of hot glue, just enough to hold each section down as it wraps. So I just keep building up the spiral little by little. Once I finished winding the rest of the rope, I grabbed another one. I added a little hot glue to the end of the new rope and pressed it right up against the end of the other one. I held it there firmly for a few seconds to make sure it stuck well, and it looked seamless. From there, I just kept going, adding more glue and wrapping the rope around. Now, when I had a few feet of rope left, I wanted to add a little detail around the edge to finish it off nicely. So instead of just continuing the spiral, I started creating these little loop scallops around the outside. I curved the rope out into a small loop and then brought it back in, pressing it down with hot glue a couple inches over. I just repeated that all the way around the edge, trying to keep the loops about the same size as I went. It adds such a pretty little border. To add a fun little accent and to help secure those glued spots a bit more, I grabbed some white yarn from Dollar Tree and threaded it through a plastic yarn needle. I kept the yarn doubled up to make it a little thicker. Starting from the back of one of the scallops, I poke the needle through just behind where I glued the rope down, and I leave a little bit of the ends in the back, and then I hold it down with some hot glue. Then I loop the yarn around that section about 3 times, and then after that I trim the yarn and glue the end down in the back. And I just continue that all the way around. It's a super simple step, but it adds a really cute touch and a little contrast against a rope. I went with 3 loops, but you can totally do more or less depending on the look that you want. You can also poke the needle a couple rows down if you want the wraps to be a little bit longer. And of course, you can switch up the color of the yarn to match your decor or just to add a pop of color. And we're all done. Such a quick little project, but it came out so pretty. I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's cutting board. I'll also be using 8 of these paint stir sticks, which I got at my local hardware store, Lowe's. They were about $1.98 for a pack of 10. I'll be making a chic bamboo box, and these are going to make the sides with 2 on each side. And so I'm just laying them on top so I can see how much I need to trim. I want the length to be a little shorter because I want the bamboo board to extend past the edges. I'll just be using my miter box and saw to trim them down. I'm cutting 4 pieces to 9 inches and another 4 to 6 inches. Since I'm making multiples of the same size, I'm just taping them together, and it makes the cutting process go a lot faster, and it keeps everything nice and even. To hold the paint sticks upright, I'm using these square dowels trimmed to about 2 3/4 inches. These are actually from some Dollar Tree canvas frame that I had left over from a past project, and they ended up being perfect for this, and they were already dry brushed with white paint. So here they are, all trimmed and ready to go. So the paint stir sticks have those little white ruler marks on them, and I did try lightly sanding some of it off, or at least just to tone it down a bit. But you know, I wasn't too worried about it since I knew I would be dry brushing some white paint over them anyway. I'm using white chalk paint from Waverly, and I'm just lightly brushing it over the paint sticks. I want it to have a weathered, distressed look, and so I'm just dry brushing it to let some of that wood still peek through. That way I get that worn out vibe without having to sand anything later. I'm starting with the longer pieces first, just brushing along the grain with a light hand. I'm not fully coating them, I just want that soft, brushed on texture that gives it a bit of character. I like when the paint goes on a little uneven, it adds some depth and it keeps it from looking too flat or uniform. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick to glue the wood together, but you can use any wood glue or even something strong like E6000 or super glue. I wouldn't really recommend hot glue for this part. It might hold at first, but over time, it doesn't have that same staying power, especially if you're planning to keep this piece for a while. So I'm starting with the longer wood pieces and adding some glue to each end, and then pressing them onto the square dowels, 1 on each side. I'm making 2 sets of these, each with 2 paint sticks spaced out evenly. Next, once that's dried a bit, I'm going to build the shorter sides. I'm using 2 paint sticks here as well, spacing them the same way as I did the longer sides. I'm just applying glue on the ends and lining them up between the 2 long sides, 1 at the top and 1 on the bottom. Then I clamp everything in place to hold it steady while the glue dries. Once all the sides are attached and everything feels secure, I'm gluing the whole crate onto the bamboo cutting board, which will make the base. And we are all done. This came together so easily, and I love how clean and simple it looks. DIY is a quick one. I grabbed one of Dollar Tree's wooden wreath beads, and I got the stained one. I also got some greenery and flowers from Dollar Tree as well. I got these a while back. The colors are so pretty, and you have 2 different shades of pink, which is nice. So first, I start by bending the stems of the greenery to match the round shape of the wreath. I'm gently shaping and curving them so they blend in naturally. You can also trim them down a bit if you want, but I'm keeping them intact since it makes attaching them to the wreath much easier. To attach, I cut a piece of floral wire and I wind it around the stem of the greenery to secure it in place. For added stability, you can also wrap some wire higher up on the stem. And then I place another greenery stem, securing it in place. This time going the opposite direction and also making sure I have some space in between for some flowers. Now for the flowers, I'll be gluing 3 of them in the center with a darker pink in the middle and the lighter pink ones on each side. That's all I'm doing for this one, but you can definitely add more flowers if you'd like, or even a small wooden sign across the middle. But personally, I love the simplicity of this one. I attached some ribbon to hang the wreath, and this one's done. For this DIY, I'll be using 4 of these round weave baskets from Dollar Tree. I'll be making a couple stacked basket stands, and this really is easy to do. I just flip over one of the baskets and apply hot glue over the bottom. Then I place a bottom second basket right on top, making sure it's perfectly aligned so the stand looks nice and even. You can hold it in place for a bit until it sets. After that, I do the next set, applying hot glue on the bottom of one and placing the second basket on top like so. Once the glue sets, they're ready to be used and you've got yourself a beautiful stacked basket pedestal. You can use it to display small plants, candles, or other decor items.
Now I love how these pedestal baskets turned out, but I decided to take it another step further and add a little more height to one of them. I'll be gluing another basket on one of them, and I'm going to connect the tops together. And the tops do fit together nicely, you just need to match the ends together, and it should fit like a puzzle. A super quick and easy way to add more height. DIY, I'll be using this garden-themed rub-on transfer from Dollar Tree and these canvases, and these came in a pack of 3, which is the exact amount that I need. I'm going to be painting the canvases with these Waverly chalk paint. So the first one I'm going to paint in the shade Celery, and I'm using a round sponge brush to paint because it applies the paint evenly and I can avoid applying multiple layers. I make sure to get closer to the edge, but I do leave the outermost area unpainted since I plan to glue a frame on top. Once I get on that first layer, I just pounce the brush over the canvas and somehow it makes the first layer look even more opaque. For the next canvas, I'm going to paint it in the shade Sandstone. So like the first one, I apply it close to the edge and then pounce the brush to fill in any areas that went on lightly. For the last canvas, I'm going to leave it as is. I'll be making a frame using these Dollar Tree blocks. I'll be using 10 blocks to make a frame, and I just glue the blocks together like so to make a rectangle, with 3 blocks on the longer side and 2 on the shorter. I'm using hot glue since I'm just making a small frame and it's going to be glued onto a canvas. Now it's time to put it all together. I also added 3 more blocks which will hold up the frames. I'm going to stain the frame with this Deco Art Americana gel stain in the shade Walnut. But before I do that, I lightly sand the joints, and I find that doing this lightly fills in the areas where the gaps are very prominent. I'm not trying to completely cover it, it's not going to do that, but just lightly blend the joints. The sawdust gets in there and sort of very lightly fills in the gaps naturally. So just brush on the stain with a little brush all over the surface, including the inner and outer sides. And once I get that on all over, I wipe it down with a clean cloth to remove the excess stain. You can definitely paint or stain this any color you like, or even keep it natural, which I was also considering. I also make sure to stain those 3 single tumbling blocks. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using this rub-on transfer from Dollar Tree. I'll be using the gardening themed ones, which is perfect for this time of year. There's 3 of them, so I cut those out. For the sandstone canvas, I'll be applying this long one with the gardening tools. So to apply, I remove the white backing paper and I place the rub-on sheet on top of the canvas, centering it. And once it's where I want it to be, I use a little plastic scraper. This one's from Dollar Tree. You can also use a popsicle stick or a spoon, and I just go over the rub-on design several times. And then I slowly peel off the plastic paper, and if there's any areas where the transfer didn't adhere well to the canvas, I just place that plastic sheet back down and I just rub over that area until the whole transfers. For the celery green, I'll be applying the wildflower one, and I place that right in the center and I rub over the image, and you'll start to notice the image slowly separating from the plastic. And that's usually when I'll start peeling it off. And now for the third and final canvas, I'll be applying this Farm Fresh transfer with a border. So I apply that on top of the canvas, rub over the image, and gently peel off the plastic paper. I love that I left this white. Here are the 3 images. They all transferred beautifully, and I love the different colors. To glue the frame, I started off applying glue around the outer edge of the canvas. Now, I was a little concerned about applying too much glue and it seeping in the inner part of the frame. So I'm sure I went a little light with the hot glue, and unfortunately, it didn't hold. I could have tried again, but I thought I would just use another type of glue. So instead of hot glue, I'll be using Titebond multi-surface glue. So just apply that around the outer edge of the canvas, and then I place a wood frame right on top, making sure the image is centered. Then on the back, I just glue a single block vertically towards the bottom end, and this will help the frame stand up. And this DIY is done, and I'm loving how all of these frames turned out. Okay, for this project, I'll be using this wood board from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to add some color with this water-based stain in the shade Special Walnut. So I'm just using a little cloth to apply the stain. I apply it on top and on the sides, and then once that's on all over, I wipe it down to remove any excess stain. I thought the wood could use some stenciling, so I'm going to be stenciling a beautiful pattern. This stencil pack is from Walmart. It comes with several designs, and I'll be using this one. I really like this pattern. It looks so beautiful on wood. I'll be using white chalk paint. So first, I tape down the stencil right in the center. I just tape it down on the sides. And then I dip my brush in the paint and I offload any excess paint on a paper towel, and this will help prevent the paint from bleeding underneath the stencil. And then I just apply the paint with a brush going in circular motions. I also like stippling the brush, especially on narrow areas. So just continue applying the paint, making sure to offload or dab out the excess paint on the brush before stenciling. Once I'm done, I remove the stencil before it completely dries. I want to stencil the whole top surface, so I just reposition it to the left and I'm just trying to match the sides, although I do want a little gap between the stencil. And then I just apply the stencil, making sure to dab out the excess paint before stenciling. Once that's done, I place a stencil on the final side, trying to match the distance. I just matched it as best as I can. I don't think it was exactly even, but it was fine. It turned out beautiful. Once that dries completely, I'm going to be buffing on some clear wax to protect it. So you want to make sure to seal it with your preferred sealer. For the legs, I'll be using these wood pieces. These are from Dollar Tree. I believe these were wooden angels, and these came in a nice little pack. So I just glue that to the bottom, one on each corner. I use a little wood block to make sure the distance to the edge is even on all corners. And I'm using wood glue for a stronger hold. I do flip it over before it dries completely, and I place some objects on top of the wood, and then I give that some time to dry completely. And this super easy DIY is done.
For this DIY, I'm using a couple of these small glass vases. One of them I grabbed from Dollar Tree, and the other one I've had for a while. The biggest thing I was looking for was making sure the opening at the top was the right size to fit a taper candle nice and snug. Not too loose, not too tight. I'll be using some chalk paint that I used earlier, khaki from Craftsmart. The Dollar Tree vase had this jute string wrapped around, so I just removed that. Now before painting, you want to make sure your vases are nice and clean and free of any grease or residue. And so I just gave mine a quick wipe down with some rubbing alcohol on a cotton ball before I got started. I'll be using one of these round foam brushes. These are from Dollar Tree, but honestly you can find them pretty much anywhere. And what I love about these brushes is that they really help the paint go on super opaque, nice and even. Look how quickly and easily it covers. I think I ended up doing a couple coats and it looked great. I also used my heat tool to speed up the drying time just so I wasn't sitting around waiting forever. I love all the details on this vase. The texture and pattern on it is so pretty. It's got that diamond cut look with just a little vintage flair, and the paint really brings all of that out. Once the paint has dried, I'm going to go in and give the vase a light sanding. I'm just focusing on those raised areas. This helps bring out those details even more and gives it that slightly worn age look without going overboard. It adds a little bit of character and dimension, and honestly, it makes that pattern pop in such a subtle but pretty way. I'm not sanding it too much, but just enough to let a little bit of that base peek through and give it a little personality. Now I kind of wish I did one more just to have a set of 3, and you can totally mix and match colors too if you want to add a little variety. The final step is just dropping in some candles. Dollar Tree has these 6-inch battery operated ones, but I didn't realize they didn't come with batteries, so I can't really speak for how well they work, but long taper candles look great in these too, especially if you want a more classic look. I'm so happy with how this came together, and it was exactly the look I was going for.
For the next DIY, I'll be making a sign, and I'll be using one of these thick wood blocks from Dollar Tree. I'll also be applying one of these metallic stickers from Dollar Tree, and I'll be painting this one white. I'll be using this gorgeous one on top. Now every design in this pack are all different, but I kind of wish they were matching pairs because I would have loved to place one towards the bottom as well. I think that would have looked really nice. So I just pressed the sticker down firmly, especially along the edges. Now I'll be painting this with white chalk paint. I'm using a round sponge brush to apply the paint. Now these sponge brushes are so versatile. It does apply the paint quickly and smoothly with good coverage. So just make sure to completely cover the metallic sticker. I do also use a small brush to get into those hard to reach areas. I also use it to remove any excess paint that may have pooled, especially in the grooves. And I just put that aside to give it time to dry completely. I'll be placing this thick home sign on the wood. You can get this at Dollar Tree and it comes in a pack of 2. I will be painting home in black, and so I just apply that with a small brush. Now you can definitely customize the wording if home is not your thing. If you have a Cricut, you can place whatever word you like, or you can even stencil. I just like the font on this wooden home sign. Then I take a sanding sheet and I sand the edges of the wood. I also lightly sand the top and edges of the wording. Before I glue down the word, I'm going to apply some antique wax over the wood with a damp cloth, applying it lightly all over, including the painted metallic sticker. Hey, by the way, if you are enjoying our crafting time together, make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Your support means a lot. And if you haven't already, will you consider subscribing? I have many more ideas coming your way, and I would love to have you on this creative journey with me. And after I get that on all over, I go back with a small brush and apply more of the antique wax on the metallic sticker. The goal is to make the details on the sticker stand out, and the antique wax does just that. And then I gently wipe it down. I also use another small brush to clean up and blend out the wax around the sticker. Wow, it's such an amazing transformation. You would never guess it was a dollar store sticker. And finally, I add some glue on the back of the home sign, and I place that right on top of the wood. And this DIY is done, and I love how it turned out.
For the next DIY, I'll be making a cute little planter box. I'll be using 3 of Dollar Tree's wooden trays, gluing the ends together to create one long base. One thing I noticed is that these trays aren't all perfectly the same size. They're close, but I did have to shift them around a bit until they fit together nicely. I'm using wood glue to attach them together, but hot glue works fine too. And then I clamp them together really well to make sure they bond, and then I let that dry completely. Once that's dry, I just give the whole thing a light sanding, and these wood trays usually have a little dried glued spots that can pop out once you stain it, so I'm trying to minimize that as much as possible. Okay, so I'm mixing up my own stain again using Apple Barrel's acrylic paints. I start with burnt umber, and then I add some nutmeg brown, a little bit of brown oxide, and just a touch of black. I also thin it down with a little bit of water so it brushes on like a stain. Of course, you can totally use any color you like. You can stain it or even paint it. And then I'm just applying it with a cloth, but I also use a brush to get into those hard to reach inner corners and edges. Now I'm putting some peel and stick paper on the surface, so I'm not too worried about getting the paint perfectly even underneath. After the first layer, I decided to add another one because I wanted the wood stain to come out a little darker, and I really love how deep the colors look at this point. Okay, so you could totally stop here, but I decided to add a little more detail and also cover up those joined areas. I'm using a couple of paint stir sticks, just measuring them to the height and trimming them down to fit. I'll be placing some on the 4 corners too, and so after cutting them to size, I did trim them in half. I'm going to paint these pieces white for some contrast, but you could definitely paint them the same color as the wood too. So I'm just lightly dry brushing the paint over the wood, so a little bit of that wood underneath still shows through. For the surface, I thought I'd use one of Dollar Tree's peel and stick wallpapers. They have so many patterns to choose from, and so I picked out this adorable green leaf design, and it's one of my favorite ones. So I'm just trimming one piece to fit inside, and then I use that as my template to cut out 2 more. To stick them down, I peel back a small piece of the backing paper first, and then I press that on the wood and slowly peel away the rest, and then I smooth it down. Then I just use a craft knife to trim off the excess for a clean edge. Okay, so here I'm gluing those trim wood pieces in place. I'm adding the larger ones right over where the tray meets, making sure it's centered. And the smaller ones go in the corners, and it gives it such a nice finished look. Now that it's all together, I kind of thought the white was looking a little too bright. Probably should have stained it before painting, and so I'm going to go over it with some antique wax to bring in a little warmth. And after that, I went back over it lightly again with the white. And this one is all done. Super easy and so cute as a little planter centerpiece, and it instantly gives your table or shelf a fresh, warm touch. I'll be making a beautiful tray, and I'm starting with this piece of plywood from Dollar Tree. It's about 12 inches, and I thought it was just perfect for what I had in mind. I was originally searching Amazon for some Moroccan tile adhesive, and they have some beautiful individual peel and stick tiles, but then I came across this gorgeous tile pattern wallpaper, and honestly it was an even better deal since it's a whole roll, and I just love the soft colors. So I'm cutting out just the amount that I need, and instead of covering the entire 12-inch piece, I decided to cut out 4 tiles from the wallpaper design and then trim the wood down to fit, but you could definitely cover the whole thing if you prefer. Next, I'm going to add a wooden border, and for that I'll be using these square dowels, which you can grab from your local hardware store like Lowe's or Home Depot. Now I'm trimming the plywood down to match the size of the tiles, and I'm also leaving a little extra space all around so the dowels can sit on the wood itself. That way I can glue them right to the base instead of on top of the wallpaper. Since the plywood is pretty thin, I just score it several times with a utility knife until it cuts clean right through. Then I trim the square dowels so they frame the square perfectly, and of course the length will depend on the size of your dowels. After that, I go ahead and adhere the wallpaper to the center of the wood, and I peel back just one edge of the backing, line it up carefully, and then smooth it down as I continue peeling the rest. Before gluing the dowels down, I wanted to stain them first, so one of my favorite stain shades is dark walnut, and so to mimic that color, I'm layering Apple Barrel's burnt umber as the base, then blending in a little bit of nutmeg brown for warmth, and since I also added a little bit of black to deepen the shade, I mixed in just a tiny bit of brown oxide to keep that cozy warmth from getting lost. I added a little water to thin down the mixture, and then I just brushed it on the dowels like a stain, wiping it down right away so the wood grain still shows through. And you can totally play around with the mix. Brown oxide will add more warmth, while black deepens the color and takes away that orangey red undertone. Either way, it turns into such a beautiful rustic shade. Okay, so now I'm just positioning the dowels before gluing them down, making sure everything lines up perfectly. I'm using some 1x2s to keep the sides nice and flush, and then I just run a strip of wood glue along the dowels and set them in place. For legs, I'll be adding these wood pieces from Dollar Tree, and they usually have different kinds throughout the year. These ones are little snowmen, and I always grab a bunch whenever they're in stock. Before I attach them, I went ahead and brushed some of that stain on the back side too, just to finish it off. And honestly, I love how the frame looked on its own. It could totally be just a cute decorative frame, so I was a little torn between keeping it as a frame or turning it into a tray, and I'll show you both looks and you can let me know which one you like better. But either way, I think it's so beautiful and I'm really happy with how it looks. I'll be using a couple of these battery-operated pillar candles. I got these at Walmart, but you can definitely use whatever you have on hand, and I'll be using the rest of the peel and stick paper we used earlier. I'm wrapping the lower portion of the candle with the paper, probably covering about 2/3 from the bottom up, and I'm just measuring how much I'll need, and thank goodness I just had enough left over. I cut the piece so there's about 1/4 inch of extra length, just to give myself a little wiggle room. Then I peel back a corner of the backing and I start sticking it onto the candle, slowly wrapping it around and smoothing it down as I go so it lays nice and even. I do the same thing with the other larger candle, slowly rolling it in place, making sure the bottom is nice and flush. And that's it. Super easy, but it adds such a soft, pretty touch to the candles. And the best part, since it's peel and stick, you can easily remove it and switch it up whenever you want. For the final DIY, I'll be using one of Dollar Tree's wood blocks. Before painting, I'm giving it a quick sanding all over, especially on the ends to smooth out any rough edges. I'm going for a lighter color on this one, mixing apple barrels, territorial beige, and khaki, and together they make a soft, earthy color. I'm also adding a little water to thin it down so it goes on smoothly like a stain. So I'm just brushing it over the wood, working in small sections and then wiping it down immediately, and this will dry really fast. I also make sure to apply it evenly on the sides. Now Dollar Tree has these really pretty medallion decor. They have different colors and styles, and I just thought this would be so stunning over the wood. So I'm just removing the jute string and the beads and then prying out the staples. It has such a pretty carved detail with a distressed finish that already looks beautiful as is, so I'm not going to paint it, but you definitely can. And I'm just gluing that right in the center. You could definitely make a pair or even a few more for a set. Now you can lean this against a wall, or if you want to hang it, just screw in a couple of hangers or even some Velcro strips for a clean finish. And this one is all done and it turned out so pretty. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked today's video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments below which one was your favorite. Until next time, bye!